Welcome, everyone. This is Joe Dager, the host of the Business 901 podcast. With me today is John Latham. John is the founder of the Organizational Design Studio, which is a digital learning center and application lab for organization architects. His passion is creating frameworks that build bridges between theory and practice to help designers build and transform organizations that create sustainable value. He can be found at organizationdesignstudio.com, which includes a robust side design for learning. John, I guess the best place to start is thanks for being here and tell us about that organization design community.
Well, thanks, Joe. It's great to be here. I love your podcast, and it's just an honor to be invited. Organization design community is an interesting group because it's people that use those words, organization design, it's kind of a fragmented group. There's all kinds of people involved, and it's not really well structured and well defined. And I think part of the issue is that it's cross-disciplinary. And so anytime you have a topic that's cross-disciplinary and involves a lot of different things in an organization, there's very few real formal tracks. So the community is really a collection of leaders who are trying to change the systems in their organization or their organization, and frontline process improvement people who are redesigning some piece of the organization. So it includes them all, plus a whole lot of subject matter experts and consultants that help leaders make the changes necessary. So it's a crazy landscape, and includes just a whole lot of different people in it.
Well, you have 14 steps in your book, okay? And I mean, do you have to use them all, or they, step by step you have to go? How does someone get started in that?
It's a great question, Joe, and I've got several answers. They're flexible frameworks, but we have organized them into 14 sequence steps. To say that that's actually how it plays out is not, that's really not the case. But that is a logical way to learn about them, and even a logical way to do them if it's the first time you're going through that process. And in fact, we just went live with more free stuff. We created a whole new section on the website and went live 2 days ago, really, called Blueprints. And it's in the main menu of our website. It's free when you sign up for the free ebooks. There's 4 free ebooks. You also get this free Blueprints. This Blueprints takes the content from the ebooks and organizes it into those 14 steps, puts it online in a different way that's searchable and linked and all that. Those 14 steps are a logical way to explore it, certainly for the first time. But if you're already in the middle of a transformation, you're already using these kinds of tools, you may enter this and say, hey, I need help here. And then you jump to wherever you need help. So it's a framework that you can enter and exit at any point, but there is a logical sequence for those that are starting out. The other part of your question was, do you have to do it all? Well, here's the deal. I don't really know. But what I do know is the organizations that have been successful and sustained these gains and actually accomplished and achieved sustainable excellence, they do them all. So you might find examples where they didn't do one thing or not one thing well. There's no perfect ones, right? But the reason those elements are there is because there was a high level of consensus across the organizations that have accomplished this. And that's the only reason it stayed in the model. I have to tell you, I wanted a much simpler model. Most everybody that looks at it says, hey, you got a lot of stuff here. I'm like, yes, we do. If we could figure out a way to make it simpler, we would, because our goal wasn't to make it complex. But when we test, we've gone through a process of testing every element. Should it stay? Should it go? Is it essential? And at the end of the day, the case was it's pretty much essential. The question is, you don't have to do all 14 at one time. You don't have to remember all 14. A lot of the steps are things that you would systematize, write down, and they're activities that you would do in a systematic way. It's not something you have to remember. And what needs to get embedded are the new ways the leader behaves and their leadership style and the culture of the organization. And to get there, the best way to do that is for the leader to personally transform. And that's really the way to be authentic, is to grow and learn themselves. And I think one of the things that all the leaders I've talked to that have led successful transformations experience was a personal learning experience. They changed from the beginning to the end. Yeah, the grooves got deeper, the gray matter got grayer. They were different people at the end, and they continued to be different people. And that wasn't just a role modeling thing, although that's important. The leaders have to role model what they want to see in the rest of the organization. But it also kept them going, because to reinvent their own organization, they had to learn new things and learn how to think about new things in different ways and test their assumptions.
So they had to be in a little bit of a tension themselves, right?
Absolutely, and the ones that didn't already know that found out along the way. There's one CEO that they've been at this for about a year or so, trying to transform, and their senior team, only about half of them were really doing it, and he talked to his, I call them spies, but informants, said, hey, find out what's going on. Why aren't they doing this? And they came back and they said, well, boss, the answer is they'll change when the CEO changes. and he was like, oh, and he was a kind of guy that sat back and reflected on that. He didn't like that answer, but when he thought about it, he thought, I'm a product of this company. I've been there over 20 years. I'm embedded in it. I'm part of the culture, the current culture, not the one we want. He goes, I really hadn't thought through what I'm going to have to do to emulate and set the example. And so once he changed his approach, and then he started getting the senior leaders on board, because he now had credibility and he was serious. We launch all these change projects and we create visions and we say we want these kind of values, but people are pretty smart. They watch our behavior, and they figure out what the real values are and what you really think is important by our behavior. And so it's great to write these things down. It's important to write them down. It's important to design all this and figure it out. But if the leaders aren't behaving in a way that is consistent with that, it's not going to work. Or I haven't seen it work, put it that way.
Well, I have to ask you, okay, since we're kind of talking this tension thing, we'll stay on just slightly here. As a consultant, as someone that comes in and helps an organization through these 14 steps, are you behind them, pushing them up the hill? Or are you in front of them, pulling them? What's your role as a consultant?
Well, that's a great question. Actually, I would say have to use both ends of that equation from time to time. Sometimes you create dissatisfaction by just showing them what's possible in other situations, right? And they may think they're much better than they really are. And if you have examples of how other people have done it and performed much better, then you can create some dissatisfaction. That's often very useful and helpful for them and provides a good service. Now I have to tell you that, you have to be ready for the conversation and the denial, because when you tell somebody that, if you use the dissatisfaction end of the scale and you tell them they're not as good as they think they are, what I've found is that almost all humans go through some sort of cycle of, they first deny that you know anything and have a clue, or they deny that those people are really producing that, or there's something unusual about that organization that got those results. If you stick to your guns and talk about it a while, eventually they'll say, okay, well, some of what you're saying we can probably learn from, but the other part's still not that good. They'll try to bargain with you, and eventually, if you hang in there, they might get angry, and if they finally hang in there with you and you stick to your gun, they eventually are a little bit depressed about the whole thing, because they've realized that they aren't as good as they thought they were. And it's only once they get past that and get to acceptance, they actually make progress and start moving forward. And many people will recognize that as Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's grieving cycle. And I guess what they're grieving is their former image of themselves is dead. and they're now grieving that and going through a process of denial and bargaining and anger and depression and finally acceptance. And the organizations that do this really well, they've learned to get through that cycle really fast, because they know that they have got to get to the other side. I have to tell you, that's not a good sales pitch either. Telling people that they're going to experience all these negative things is probably not a great way to sell them on taking on this journey, because the interesting thing is the organizations that are highest performing, just a side anecdote here, that the organizations that are the highest performing have the most problems. And when I noticed this, I was like, this is really strange, because the low performing organizations, they don't seem to have as many problems as the high performing organizations. And that just didn't make sense to me at all. And I thought about it, and I'm a slow learner sometimes, so I had to think about it. And when I thought about it, I thought, it's not the number of problems that they have. That's not the variable I'm looking at. I'm looking at the number of problems they're willing to tell somebody about, or they think they have. And what I found was the organizations that are low performing, they don't think they have many problems because they don't really know what great performance looks like. And if they do know, they are denying they have problems. So they don't have many problems. And if you don't think you have many problems, well, guess what? You're not working on improving very many things, because you don't think you have problems. The high performing organizations, the more high performing they got, the more they understood about what was possible. And so they knew more and more about their organization and how imperfect it was as the more they learned. And so they became even more dissatisfied the more they learned and the further they went and the higher performing they were. But that was an essential ingredient to getting them to improve, because you can't improve something that's not broken. And if they don't think it's broken, even though it is, they don't think it's broken, they won't improve it. So that, I think the really high performing organizations, they recognize, and Jim Collins, I think, called this the brutal facts of reality. They were able to face the brutal fact. I think that's what really we're seeing is the same thing that Jim Collins saw in those organizations he studied, was that they were honest with themselves, and that enabled them to work the problem.
What's the best way for someone to connect up with you?
Well, the first way is organizationdesignstudio.com, and there's several ways to connect with us there. You can contact us through that site. There's several social media places where we've started putting stuff, and we're going to attempt to build a conversation and a community out there in the social media. But my direct email is john@organizationdesignstudio.com. So if you want to email me directly, I answer all my own mail. I don't even have a virtual assistant that does that. So when you hear back from me, it's me.
It's really you. Huh?
It's really me. John@organizationdesignstudio.com is the email.
Okay. Well, I'd like to thank you very much, John. I appreciate it. This podcast will be available on Business 901 iTunes Store, the Business 901 website. So thanks, everyone, for listening.
Thanks, Joe.